Welcome to Potline Bling, the podcast where we talk about cannabis, science, and cool things going on in the industry. I'm your host, JJ Coombs. Today, I have the pleasure of introducing the founder of the Global Cannabinoid Research Center in Santa Barbara, California, and a multiple cancer survivor, Mike Robinson. Mike, thanks for taking the time to join us today.
Well, thank you so much for having me.
Of course. So, Mike, you've done a lot of cool things in the industry. You are on the 100 list of High Times most influential people in the industry in 2021. Why don't we get this podcast started by telling us a little bit about yourself and your background?
Well, my background is far beyond cannabis. I used to be a race car driver long ago. In 1995, I got in a pretty brutal accident or wreck on the track. It's really not an accident, and I was critically injured. And that gave me a severe form of epilepsy. I had to find a different route in life. And as I came home from the hospital, I found my son, my own biological son, that's about 30 years old now, to be severely autistic. And that set me on the path to become a civil rights lobbyist and represent kids in special education and in civil rights disputes. And it just was one thing after another, a cascading event where eventually, after about 20 years of doing that, I saw or had the ability to use cannabinoid medicine, and that stopped my seizures and allowed me to also share all of that abundance of information to the thousands and thousands of people that I'd worked with over the last 2 decades. So it was a pretty interesting evolution coming from being somebody that represented disabled children in one realm to move into the cannabinoid medicine world where we're representing them in a whole different way.
That's amazing. When you say cannabinoid medicine, can you go into a little more detail about that? Is it just CBD, CBG, like the cannabinoids that people know of, or you dove a little deeper into that?
Well, when it comes to cannabinoid medicine, we delve a little bit deeper into that. My own history includes not just fighting severe epilepsy over that 2-decade period of time before I started ingesting and helping the other kids. I also had cancers, 3 different stage 4 cancers. And that was one of the reasons High Times honored me, which felt a little bit strange, to be honest with you. I'm like on this top 100 list because I lived. And I guess that's one heck of an achievement when you have 3 stage 4 cancers. So when we look at cannabinoid medicine, we look far beyond THC, CBD, dabs, joints, and we also include the future. And as much as a lot of us don't like it, the future is including pharmaceutical companies, pharmaceutical preparations, nanotechnology, some next level creations far, far beyond what we see for sale in the dispensary. But it is one in a whole. So when you look at a joint, for example, to a dab, to what GW Pharma made with Epidelex, their CBD juice, it's all cannabinoid medicine. It's a term that brings legitimacy to the cannabis movement.
Absolutely. I have a doctorate in pharmaceutical sciences. I got into this industry for that reason, right? I turned down a job in biotech to educate people on the wonders that cannabis can do from a pharmaceutical perspective. So it's very refreshing to hear this. I've been in the industry for a while. I have my brand, I have my lab, I sell raw materials, and there's definitely a huge sector that takes this for, medicinal use, but there's, also the sector that, takes, cannabinoids for recreational purposes. So you were talking about like GW and, kind of diving a little bit deeper. While you had your cancer, what was your go-to cannabinoid medicine? Did you do tinctures, gummies?
It's pretty incredible because as I started the cancer battle, I also started the movement from being somebody as a civil rights lobbyist that did legal research to somebody in the world of cannabis or cannabinoid medicine researching in a whole different light to save my life. And I started out like everybody else does, pretty much with cancer, introduced to cannabinoids or cannabis, RSO. That was the thing. THC oil. Then it was THC oil with some CBN. Then it was THC oil with some CBN and this cool new thing that we started playing with, which was CBG back about 7 years ago. So as much as it's really popular now, a CBGA, because of the Oregon State University study, way back when I was fighting cancer in 2015, 16, 17, and even 18, it was a progression where it started out with RSO, THC oil, or FICO, some call it, as being the mainstay. And it was the number one thing that was provided by the huge compassion program that I ran, giving away oils to patients in need. Everything had to be THC oil. Nothing could be from hemp back then. And that's the interesting evolution, as I call it, just within myself, because I never would have guessed that or dreamed of loving hemp extracts like I do today and the acidic cannabinoids like I do today. But it took a period of time in fighting cancers. And I'm so glad you asked this question, because I really thought that I would be able to beat cancer in 90 days with 60 grams. And nothing could be further than the truth than those memes that say that. Some people might only use, it's hard to say what somebody's going to use in their cancer battle, because you need to know the type of cancer, the stage, the health, overall health of the human in the first place. There's so many factors that come to this. So for me, it's such a short question and I have a long answer, but I went from the THC laden oils to other cannabinoids to nanotechnology to bathing myself in water-soluble nanotech, thousands of milligrams at a time. I became a researcher by treating myself, pretty much. So I would say I probably used at least 10 to 12 cannabinoids, including Delta-9 THCO acetate, the true THCO.
That's incredible. I mean, we've done at our lab a good amount of research on this. We're producing a ton of different cannabinoids. We're acetylating CBD that's going to increase the bioavailability. We're doing like diacetyl CBD. We're doing like THCO methoxy. We're methylating, and it's incredible to see how different it works when you do some manipulation to the cannabinoids. From a pharmaceutical perspective, from how it binds to the half-life, and we've seen a lot of success selling blends of different hemp cannabinoids with THCs. It's really nice to hear from someone that went through this and used this as medicine, talking about how it's helped you out. Getting into the water soluble, I know you mentioned nano. Did you when you were bathing in it, thousands of milligrams, I know when you're able to encapsulate cannabinoids, it could actually penetrate the skin. So when you would lay in these tubs, would you ever just get out and like feel high or feel some type of way?
Oh yeah. I mean, that's the science that I was using. I now am the 75% owner of Nanotech Corp, Nanobles, where I do a ton of R&D with water soluble, and it all came from how I treated myself. And I'll tell you, this is back in the wild, wild west compassion days where we made gallons of oil and gave them away, and things were given to us by the tote. And at one point, I had a guy who was closing up his shop and moving on to, he was going into energy sector or something, and he gave me this whole big tote of all of these bags and jars of white stuff. And I was like, yeah, I don't use isolate. And he was like, this isn't isolate. This is nano powder and nano serums. And I was like, I didn't know what you're talking about. And And I started researching on my own, and I figured out that same night exactly what he gave me. And I was like, wow, this guy just handed me $250,000 worth of stuff. And immediately I started using it on myself so I could then make things for other cancer patients and start giving it away. And I'll tell you, I did some soaks, and I still do these today that were up to a couple thousand milligrams at a time using CBD CBG combo and some terpenes. And you get out of that tub, even while you're in it, you sort of go into this tubular existence, and then you come out so ready for a restful sleep. All the pain is gone. All the biggest thing that I was looking at in all of it was the chronic issue with cancer patients, and that's cytokine response syndrome. This is the same thing that happens with COVID. We heard widely about the cytokine storm. Well, that's just a catchphrase pretty much for cytokine response syndrome, which cancer patients go through. And that's are the same thing that happened with COVID, where all these false signals are sent all over our body that we have inflammation when we don't. And we end up with a lot of pain. And by taking those soaks, it completely knocked that out. I would get out of that bath and just crash out and get 8 or 10 hours of sleep. So it was pretty incredible, and I had no plans of being an owner of a nanotech entity or anything like that. That came to me in like 2018, 19, like almost 4 or 5 years later after getting that tote.
Wow, that's a cool story. To continue talking a little more about the nano, we started doing like the nano solid, nano water soluble with like your like polysorbate 80, your emulsifier and sonicator, and as we progress, we actually switched over to making micelles, which are smaller than the liposomes that are made in like the traditional way. And it's made different. We don't have to use a sonicator, and the actual dosage is lower. Are you guys doing anything like that over in the company?
No, I actually merged Global Cannabinoid Research Center into the nano entity because so much of the R&D is on nano and nanotech. And, actually not doing anything like that. That's pretty next level what you're talking about. And I've read quite a bit about that. I recently was a keynote at the World Nanotechnology Conference in Copenhagen, and I spoke on the dangers of nanotechnology. And I've done that like 3 years in a row. I always think that I'll never be asked back because of the title, but I get asked to talk about the same thing again. And it's why I prefer the topical transdermal approach, because we know there's a trickle effect into the bloodstream. We know we've got a lot of filtration barriers using the epidermis, using tissue, using our muscles or everything else is picking up what's used to emulsify and encapsulate. And I personally have concerns about ingested nanotechnology products if I don't know who made them. And it's not that I don't think nanotechnology is safe to ingest. I definitely do. It's just like anything else, any other industry. We have good players, bad players, and some people are using really good techniques that are really healthy for people, and some people aren't. So when I say the dangers of nanotechnology, I more so mean, hey, just keep your eyes and ears out. And it's just like anything else. You should know your source and know what you're using.
Absolutely. I started my company a couple years ago, and since I've started, I have noticed some of those, you want to call them bad players, start getting weeded out of the industry. I mean, it's so important. It's in particular when we're talking about using cannabinoids for a medicinal perspective, to have all the right labs, to use food safe, food grade ingredients, In particular with nano, you're right. I mean, it's the reason why it's called nano is because it bypasses your metabolism. So it's able to go in right away because it's you're encapsulating the cannabinoids, and not only does it create a different feeling, but it doesn't get filtered through your liver like a traditional edible. So definitely I can't agree with you more. Have the right labs, know who you're buying it from. Okay, so
Yeah, just the safety protocols are important. So and that's truly, with nanotechnology, where I see the plant being able to find its place in the world of pharmaceuticals. There's a lot of concern that Johnson and Johnson, Pfizer, and GW, of course, was bought by Jazz Pharmaceuticals. So Jazz and all these big players that came in with literally more money than Canopy Growth has, in just 1 year. They're all doing biotech research. A lot of them are doing it on my favorite cannabinoid, CBGA, and I get approached several times a week over it. And it's so we're going to see a lot of synthetics, and we're going to see a lot of synthetics that come from plant cannabinoids that are abundant. And I don't like that, to be honest with you, at all. I believe that there are a lot of cannabinoids out there that could be synthesized. For example, your varins, CBV is a very powerful cannabinoid people don't know about that comes from CBGVA. And something like that, I fully think is a great idea. Go ahead and synthesize things that you can't readily available get from the plant. But where I see cannabis staying intact, where the plant itself will be able to be useful in the pharmaceutical world, is definitely in nanotechnology.
That's where I feel like, some people don't like pharmaceuticals or pharmaceutical companies. I think it's for that reason. Me coming from that pharmaceutical background, I could see for them it makes more sense to synthesize it. And this is like a hot topic for me. It's like, what's considered synthetic if it's nature identical? I mean, obviously it's not grown from the plant, but if it's nature identical and it does the same thing and it's able to be done in a cleaner, more scalable environment, what's the harm in that? Although I'm from the industry, I started off growing and all that, and I could definitely appreciate that. I think for me, what I would like to see is the full supply chain that the industry affects is who I want to keep in place. So from the farmer to the extractor to the guy that makes the isolate to the company that manufactures all the products and does the lab testing and pays for the marketing and puts out the quality product. So how do you feel about that? So like something that is, considered synthetic, but it's nature identical.
Well, I don't have the problem with synthetics that a lot of people in the cannabis industry do. And the reason is very basic. I'm about 3.5 years opioid free. What was I addicted to? Was I addicted to nature? No. I was addicted to synthesis. So can we truly help people who have been on methadone for 10 years with THC not synthesized, not created into THCP, for example, or lab manipulated into? So we have so many different things to look at. We have certain cannabinoids will have to be in a scheduled area. They're just too strong. THCP, for example, the plant could be descheduled, but of course, something like that would stay scheduled because it would be used in pharmaceutical applications. And if it was synthesized, so what? If it works and stops the person from actually using the dangerous drug that could kill them, we have to stay in reality. And the reality is a ton of people don't have the right kind of medicine. And if we can have pharmaceuticals that are modeled after cannabinoids, and they are, as you state, they're like nature, they're working the same way, then we start moving into what I truly look at as cannabinoid medicine. And I think I'm sort of separated from a big pack because I put endo in front of that word. I don't look at it as just cannabinoid. I look at the whole endocannabinoid system. I look at every single diagnosis people have, including cancers, as billing codes because that's what they are. It's how doctors get paid. It's how hospitals get paid. They need an ICD-10 code to say this person has this, and they use that same code to apply a bunch of pharmaceuticals that fit that diagnostic, when truly the problem's in the endocannabinoid system. And truly, when we look at research and science and all this emerging information, what's actually working in our body to get us better? Endocannabinoids. So if we look at treating the ECS, and instead of throwing THC and CBD and stuff like that at problems like a Band-Aid pretty much, and instead say, okay, this is the problem with the balance of the ECS, with satiation issues or whatever problem, and we fix the endocannabinoid system, and now it's actually producing the proper tone. Now we have a good endocannabinoid tone. We have plenty of receptors, plenty of anandamide pumping, plenty of 2-AG. Now the person doesn't get cancer, Lyme's, lupus, their pain problems go away. So I believe that there is a lot of room for a lot of medications that could be pharmaceutical that could actually help our endocannabinoid system function.
I agree with that. Let's talk a little bit about information that's available right now. Something that we get a lot of questions on is like dosing. And a lot of people get their information from what they read on social media or what they see on Instagram. How do you see, as like an industry leader in this, like how are you combating this and putting out the proper information for people to, do their own research on and figure out what works best for their bodies?
I have a website that's called cannabinoidadvice.com. And on this website, which doesn't have much information, but it has the exact information to answer your question. It basically tells people that I do not give comment advice on social media, because the right answer for somebody else with the exact same problem you have could be the very wrong answer for you. And I believe that as any type of influential person in the world of cannabis, we should all be sort of teaming up together to spread that message. As much as Facebook groups and Instagram and Twitter and everywhere else is a place to get information, everybody has a unique endocannabinoid system. They could have the exact same diagnosis and need two totally different protocols. People are not picking up information in regards to things like dose response. Most don't even know what it means. So the person takes this much of CBD, THC, you name it, what happens? We need to look at that and see how the endocannabinoid system responded and then make an adjustment to the dose. When I work with a patient one-on-one, we're making adjustment after adjustment after adjustment, and we're not doing it based on the available cannabinoids. And we're doing it based solely on what's coming back from dose response logs, where people keep track of, hey, I took this many milligrams of this many milligrams of this, and this is what happened to me. And it's very important that people remember how unique they are as an individual in everything they do. Nobody draws the same, nobody writes the same, or nobody listens to music the same, and our endocannabinoid systems are also that unique.
Absolutely. That, and depending on how you ingest the cannabinoid medicine, everyone metabolizes cannabinoids differently. I remember in school looking up the pharmacokinetics of edibles. Pharmacokinetics, for listeners that don't know, it's how your body responds to the medicine, right? And it was so variable over edibles, and I think that's why we have, or at least I hear about or read about, some people having bad experiences the first time they consume edibles, or hey, my friend usually eats 20 milligrams, and I ate 20 and I didn't feel anything. So education is a big thing. Mike, what you're doing is incredible. Not only for patients suffering from certain ailments like cancer, but also for the industry as a whole. We need more education in the industry, and it takes us to talk about it and go on podcasts and make websites and tell our stories. So I want to tell the listeners, if you guys want to know a little more about Mike and his companies, you can go to cannabinoidadvice.com, mikesmedicines.com, or cannabislovestory.com. There's also, I see here, Mike, 50K reasons. What's that?
That's my email address. 50,000 people per year perish to epilepsy. And this was a study like a decade ago. And my email has stayed the same because we haven't had a new one. So there's 50,000 reasons to do what I do. And that's at gmail.com. That's how to get a hold of me by email.
There we go. There's also globalcannabinoidrc.com. And that's the research center where you can find more about the research that Mike's doing on this. I want to thank all you listeners for taking the time to join us today. Mike, thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule to hop on this podcast. You can find our podcast on any of the major podcast streaming services: Spotify, Apple, iHeartRadio, Amazon Music, Google, or wherever you listen to podcasts. All right, guys, we'll see you on the next episode.
Thank you so much.
The opinions expressed on this CannabisRadio.com program are those of the guests and hosts and do not necessarily reflect those of the staff and management of CannabisRadio.com. Any rebroadcast, republication, or retransmission of this program without proper consent is prohibited.